Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I thank the Secretary of State for advance sight of his statement, although I wish it was an advance sight because this government leaked it on the Friday and his department briefed it to the press yesterday. Parliament should not learn the details of government policy through newspaper reports. This House deserves transparency. Now, there are some measures in this strategy that we welcome. Efforts to tackle extremism in charities and universities are important and necessary, and we welcome them. But this strategy lacks ambition and action to deliver tangible change. And, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Secretary of State spoke for 2 minutes over his allocated time, which is ironic because there's absolutely nothing new in the measures that the government are announcing this evening. The strategy claims that the government intends to embed the anti-extremism principles adopted by the previous Conservative government in 2024. But if that is the case, why has this government reversed the position on naming extremist organisations? We now have a ridiculous situation where the government claims it has a policy of non-engagement with extremists, but refuses to say who that policy applies to. Last month, we saw this confusion laid bare. When the Home Office was asked whether it engaged with the Muslim Council of Britain, 2 different ministers gave contradictory answers. When asked whether the MCB had given written evidence to the MacDonald Review into hate crime, the policing minister stated, "The government's policy of non-engagement with the Muslim Council of Britain has not changed." But just 2 days later, when asked whether the Muslim Council of Britain was on the list of organisations subject to that policy, the security minister replied, "The Home Office does not comment on specific groups." So which is it? And this lack of transparency also applies to the review itself. Will the Minister now publish the full report provided to him by the working group? Will he publish a list of every external organisation that the working group met and every organisation his department has subsequently consulted on that report? And will he confirm whether organisations deemed extremist or subject to the government's policy of non-engagement were permitted to submit evidence? Because so far, this review appears to have been conducted largely in secret. The government had to be dragged, kicking and screaming, even into publishing an email address so that evidence could be submitted. Madam Deputy Speaker, this proposed definition still raises serious questions. Jonathan Hall KC, the government's independent reviewer of terrorism legislation, has warned that any definition should include clear examples of free speech that are not considered anti-Muslim hatred. He said it is important that people can still openly discuss difficult but significant topics such as migration and Islamism. So it risks undermining free speech within the law, it risks hindering legitimate criticism of Islamism, and it risks creating a backdoor blasphemy law. Now, on English language, the strategy also claims the government wants to promote the English language, but it will not say whether it supports the guidance issued to councils in 2013 by the then Secretary of State, Eric Pickles, which advised against routine translation into foreign languages. Madam Deputy Speaker, we should be investing in English language training, not endless translation. Translation undermines integration, it wastes taxpayers' money, and it ultimately harms equality. There is no legal duty on councils to translate documents into foreign languages, yet too often officials gold-plate the Equality Act and do so anyway. Meanwhile, around 1 million adults in this country cannot speak English properly. This fundamentally limits their life chances and it perpetuates separate communities. If a government truly believed in equality, it would not turn a blind eye to practices like family voting, where husbands effectively take the votes off their wives, nor would it tolerate the misogyny and segregation that occur when men prevent women from learning English. And finally, there is the question of, if they might want to listen, because I'm about to talk about anti-Semitism, and I know they've had a problem with that, but on the question of anti-Semitism, will the government challenge anti-Israel boycotts and divestment campaigns in local government, as we have seen recently in Bristol, advocated by a party in this House? Such campaigns fuel hostility towards Jewish people and contribute to the rise in anti-Semitism. Local procurement boycotts of Israel are supposed to be unlawful, yet ministers do nothing to enforce the law. They would not even compile a list of councils pursuing such boycotts. Added to these fears, separatism is on the rise in our country, as the Leader of the Opposition rightly set out in her speech last week. She said that for too long, Britain has been complacent about its own culture and too tolerant of those who weaponise identity politics for their own gain. Britain is a multi-racial country, but it must not become a multicultural one. We must reject the absurd idea that culture, that was in the Secretary of State's statement, by the way, we must reject the absurd idea that culture is something imported from somewhere else. For integration to work, people must know what they are integrating into. That means a culture that is confident, a culture that is strong, and a culture that believes in itself. And that is what this government still seems unable to understand and unwilling to defend.
Secretary of State.
Well, I thank him, I think, for his comments. Now, the reason this is the first social cohesion strategy any government's published for so many years is because they didn't bother when they were in government. And no, there has not been proactive engagement with the MCB in the work that was carried out by the government or the task force. The previous government didn't publish a social cohesion strategy, but they did sow division in our communities. Their asylum seeker hotel policy that we are having to clean up caused all sorts of problems all over the country. They actively stripped money out of poorer communities, then boasted about it, leaving high streets to fall into decline and the people living in those communities to feel that the country was going backwards and was offering nothing to them. The definition of itself, there is absolutely no question of blasphemy laws by the back door, but we will not do what they did and stand by and simply watch while Muslim communities face targeted abuse in ways that any decent country would consider to be absolutely intolerable. And as for English language teaching, they cut funding for it by 60% and then have the cheek to stand up there and say there's not enough of it going on. Now, when I was a student, I volunteered to teach English to refugees. I suggest he might go out and do the same thing because it's very enriching for the volunteer, it's beneficial for the person learning English, and speaking the same language is fundamental to social cohesion.
Sir Julian Lewis.
Like, I think, a number of other honourable and right honourable members, I come from an immigrant family and grew up in a household where a foreign language was primarily spoken by my grandparents. My father was bilingual and I was monolingual with the language of the country that my family had come into. So the key to it all, working, is willingness to integrate. So can the Secretary of State confirm that there are measures in this overall plan that seems to have much to commend it, which are designed to prevent separatism and ghettoisation in society, because really where that exists, a community becomes impossible to navigate in the way that I think we would all want it to be navigated.
Secretary of State.
I thank him for his question. And there's an awful lot in the report, and I can't go through all of it because I'll further annoy Madam Deputy Speaker by using up too much time. But if I might point to one area where we're allocating £500 million to link together schools from different communities so that children growing up, perhaps with their friends from the same community as them, can get to know and understand better children from other backgrounds as well, and to understand that they live and are part of a thriving, diverse community.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In 1979, my father took me to Newton Stewart Cinema to see Monty Python's The Life of Brian. And I recall my father being more upset by a spoof travel documentary that preceded the main film because there was swearing in it than he was about the supposed slights to Christianity. And it was an early reminder to me, or an early lesson to me, that no one in this country, in a modern democracy, has the right not to be insulted or offended. So why is it that we in this place, the cockpit of democracy, why are we discussing a blasphemy law by the back door?
Secretary of State.
Well, I'm sorry he's chosen to misrepresent the definition. It is intended to protect Muslims from abuse that we know is shrinking people's lives and life opportunities. You would hope that everyone in this House would get behind actions intended to give Muslim people the same chance as anyone else in our country.